as we start reorienting towards kind of mutual aid systems and local economies, circular economies, we're going to have to be in relationship. And so, I think one of the biggest lessons is the sort of like a commitment to place and to people, and just a commitment to like working through those messy relational dynamics.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. My name is Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're exploring the intersections of regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. Created with Ma Earth, you can find all of our conversations and more at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Tibet Sprague from Hylo. Hylo helps groups and communities get things done. I've been tracking this project for a while, but what particularly caught my attention recently were the new features they released for farmers and bioregions. Tibet is deeply entrenched in the movement for open source software and coordination tools. I saw him at ETH Denver 2023, so we caught a quick conversation with him before his flight. Let's dive right in. Tibet Sprague. We're here with Tibet Sprague, who is a core steward at Terran Collective and lead developer at Hylo. Welcome, Tibet.
Thank you. Yeah, really glad to be here.
Great. So super excited to get into this conversation. Want to talk about Hylo, want to talk about Terran Collective. Maybe before we get there, a little bit about your journey and context into this work.
Sure. I call myself a communitarian technologist. That's kind of one of my taglines. I've been really oriented around building community and building technology since I was very young. Also been an entrepreneur, started many things, worked in the solar industry for a long time, and kind of all along the way maybe the shortcut is to say capitalism corrupt or co-opt or almost even destroy the work that I was doing. And so created the Terran Collective with some friends 6-7 years ago now to kind of create a container to do the work we wanted to do in the world, create change in the world, and kind of protect it in a certain way from the sort of extractive, profit-driven orientation of companies these days. So that's why we call it a collective. And our work is really how do we build systems and tools to enable better collaboration and cooperation, both with each other as humanity and also with the earth, with the land.
Great. And so can you go into a bit more depth of what is Terran Collective and then also its relationship or how that also led you to Hylo?
So, Terran Collective is really just a group of friends working together, supporting each other, kind of bringing our whole selves into our work. Many of us have lived together. We're oriented around the San Francisco Bay Area bioregion as a place where we build community and kind of weave, change makers and social entrepreneurs and activists and people doing all kinds of good work on the ground there. And then many of us are technologists, and so we've worked on a few different platforms. We actually helped build DAO Stack, some of the early DAO tooling software, and most recently are working on Hylo, which we call the Prosocial coordination platform for a thriving planet. And so that's kind of our biggest focus right now is this platform.
And so my understanding is that you came into the Hylo journey after it had somewhat already started. Mm-hmm. And so something grabbed you here, something got you motivated to put your life energy into this. And yeah, what's got you so excited and persistent about building Hylo?
Yeah, Hylo's a really unique, interesting story. It was a for-profit VC-backed startup. I think it originally launched in 2013, or the company kind of started then. Some friends of ours, Ed West and Julia Pope and others in this space, had a similar vision to, I would say I've been actually holding a vision of the power of social networks and kind of coordination tools since college for a really long time and kind of always wanting to work on those. And then through Terran Collective, worked on a few different paths, again, exploring like DAOs for a while. And then Hylo, they kind of ran out of money, didn't quite get to full launch, and ended up being purchased by Hylo of Holochain, you may know. And at the same time, it was sort of they like acquired the team and the code and weren't really planning to maintain the current platform. And so through a series of fortuitous conversations, they ended up basically giving it to us, the Terran Collective, to continue building. And so here was an opportunity to take a platform that already had a lot of work put into it, had a really similar vision to how we were thinking about coordination tools, and has been liberated from VC, from investor pressure. We are running it. We open source all the code. We're running it in a kind of nonprofit way. We actually have a nonprofit entity and a for-profit entity, and we're still kind of figuring out the long-term best legal structure around it. But have that nonprofit orientation, open source, want to collaborate, interoperate with as many other people and platforms as possible that are holding the same vision.
And how do you identify Hylo in the conversation around Web3, crypto, blockchain? You were doing work with DAOs way back when, so I know you're deeply familiar with this space. And yet my perception is that you're also a bit of a skeptic, or at least have some concerns or some pragmatic worries about it. And so I don't know, we haven't talked too much about it, but I'm just curious what your take is.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the Web3 movement. In particular, just so much energy and intelligence and thought and experiments happening around new economic models and governance models. And I think that blockchains and crypto have a role in the future. Like, they're interesting technologies that offer a lot. But of course, the space has been, in some ways, dominated by a lot of speculation, a lot of focus on just making money, and a lot of attempts to kind of use blockchains for things that they're not actually that useful for. And I think in the DAO space, and we were pretty early, and obviously the DAO space has evolved a lot, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. I still saw what to me was too much of a connection of money and power. And when I think about new governance models, a lot of what I care about is separating money and power, and decentralizing power and moving from power over models to power with models. But I think money has a tendency to corrupt a lot of the attempts, and I also saw a lot of attempts to kind of engineer the ability to do kind of decentralized governance within a way that really ignored the fact that so much of governance is human, no matter what. Like, you end up coming down to social interactions and social structures and culture and human relationships. And so our orientation with Hylo is really like, how do we build the tools that help humans learn to cooperate with each other at every scale, but starting with small groups and bioregions. And so, it's really about building trust, building relationship, getting people off of technology to do things in the world together to actually create change and create impact. So that's kind of been our focus. And the other big piece that's challenging with Web3 still is just the user experience, and it's not accessible to a lot of people. And so we're trying to build tools now that are useful to people in our communities that are doing good work, and bring in distributed ledger technology when the time is right and for the right tools. And so we're kind of been focusing on more the communication layer and just kind of having a really solid basis of all the features needed for groups to work well together. And then governance tools are kind of coming next. And that's when we start to think about, okay, votes should probably be on a chain or a distributed ledger or distributed hash table or something where they're really secure and transparent. And same with financial tools. Like, we will be bringing those in as well. And, of course, for all of this, wanting to integrate as much as possible with what's out there.
Right.
But, you probably will be building tools that work with fiat and tools that work with a wallet and, support DAOs where they're at, as well as your local activist group and your bioregional, governance organization and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that it's not necessarily a broad-based philosophical problem with Web3 crypto, space, more that what you've sensed so far in what's instantiating itself in the behaviors does have some perverse consequence, things like token voting, where those who accrue the most tokens then have power over the network. And wait, that's not what we really wanted to create.
Yeah.
And maybe a fairly level-headed agnostic view about right tool for the right job. And sometimes blockchains are irrelevant and, just trying to force everything on chain or, make everything autonomous to meet the definition of a DAO, when what we're really talking about are human communities that, you're just trying to navigate what makes sense for what you're trying to build and meet people where they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so with Hylo, it does seem that you're really trying to push the edges of meeting people in this regenerative space at a community level, and you've already evoked bioregions. So yeah, where is Hylo going, and what are some of your visions of where this is leading to new possibilities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the tools are general purpose community tools. They could be used as an alternative to a Facebook group or Slack or Discord, Mighty Networks. And so in some sense, we're building general tools that can be useful for all kinds of communities. We also have a place-based layer to that, like a geographic map where you can find people and projects and organizations locally and do mutual aid with requests and offers and events. So we can maybe get into the place-based bioregional aspect a little bit more. But then, in our current focus and the kind of like niche that we're like focused on initially, because we're still in the kind of word of mouth early adopter phase. We haven't like gone into a growth phase yet. Getting there, very close. But we have really focused on people that are creating serious impact in the world, and that are doing the important work of regenerating our planet and our communities. And so we work in a really co-creative partnership-based model. So we partner with organizations that are really aligned in the vision, and want to kind of work with us to build these tools alongside us. So one of our biggest partners is Open Team, which is the open technology ecosystem for agricultural management. And so they have the goal of bringing farmers off of proprietary systems where they don't own their own data. They, who knows what their data is really being used for, into open source software. And there's a bunch of different tools that are kind of in this ecosystem. And Hylo's coming in as the community platform for farmers and a way for them to find each other and kind of share best practices with each other, also get more connected to their local market in their area. And so we worked closely with Open Team on a kind of shared data schema for farm data, first of all. And that was a kind of network-wide process with a lot of land stewards involved in that. And so then farm data can now come into Hylo, and farms can be found, based on what their practices are and what products they're growing, and connect with each other that way. So that's been a really amazing use case, and we're still focused on that. And the other interesting thing about Open Team is they're also oriented towards data sovereignty and data portability, and farmers who are often not very tech savvy, being able to really own their own data and decide who to share it with. And so there's really is an interesting attempt to kind of bring together Web3 and regenerative agriculture and more traditional Web2 and open source tools. And it's a long-term process and community working on that.
Yeah, I mean, it really matches our observations in the New Zealand regenerative farming movement, that what moves the dial is when farmers talk to other farmers and can share best practices, and that communication, creating tools to support and enable those conversations between farmers is just, in my mind, fundamentally positive. And importantly, what you're saying is that it's a place where people can go where they know it's open source, that they have sovereignty with their data, that they have, they're not being commodified into big tech advertising engines, et cetera. So I guess the elephant in the room on that is how do you then fund the development of such tooling and technology? And you mentioned liberating Hylo from venture capital incentive structure. And what we're seeing a lot of in Web3 is that the incentive structures are underpinned by VC money. And that is, a bit of an elephant in that room as well. So yeah, curious how you're thinking about funding and what have you learned in this difficult effort to not take maybe an easier path and to try to do this in first principles way that doesn't load so much financial interests underneath.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, definitely tricky. We have so far been able to fund ourselves entirely through this kind of partnership, co-development partnership model. So finding, again, really aligned organizations that want to use Hylo, that want to see it exist, that want to fund a public good, because whatever we build with them is useful to everyone using the platform. And we work closely with them in the design and the development of the platform, but there's no return on their investment except for the platform getting better and them getting the features that they need for their communities. And that has worked really well and really beautifully. It's also, means that we're going slow and we have a small team, and we sometimes hit little funding gaps when we're trying to line up our next partnerships. So we're certainly, we're exploring different options. We've been exploring philanthropy as an option to kind of give us a bigger runway. That hasn't quite, there's definitely been some philanthropy that has come through, but not a significant amount that has given us the runway we need to get to kind of sustainable revenue, for example. But we're thinking about other investment models, kind of steward ownership models where investors don't have more voting power than other stakeholders, or potentially any voting power at all, or where it's a kind of revenue share model where they're getting a percentage of net revenue after a couple of years when we're making some revenue up to a capped return, perhaps. So models like that where the purpose is always at the center and can never be disrupted by the financing model we're thinking about. But I'm actually, at this moment, pretty hopeful that we will be able to pull this off entirely through this partnership model. And because we're kind of building an alliance of incredible organizations around the platform that are all supporting it and using it. And I think that's the model that's most exciting to me, and that this has so far worked. And we'll see if we can kind of thread the narrows of getting a big enough alliance around that we have the support we need to get to sustainable revenue.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess, part of what I take away there is one, there's a plurality of funding approaches. And so it's about iterating, experimenting, exploring, but also just, taking a breath and being thoughtful about the incentive structures that are underpinning these tools, because as we've seen with big tech, they have tremendous long-stream consequences. And if we're preparing for success in terms of scale and in terms of replicability of these systems, we need to be aware of the unintended consequences of value capture that could also happen, or governance implications as well.
Yeah.
So can we launch into bioregional governance and how you think about bioregions and what has you animated in that space?
Yeah. So I think as maybe I said at the beginning, that the way we're trying to design the platform is kind of building in tools, structures, design principles oriented around helping humans cooperate with each other and with the land. And maybe I'll just mention a couple of the tools that we're focused on that are about helping humans learn to cooperate. We're working with some folks who have written a book called Prosocial that builds on Eleanor Ostrom's work, which is relevant to the bioregionalism as well, because it's about how groups of humans steward common resources well together. And so they've built on her research and added in kind of modern behavioral science and evolutionary theory to really distill pretty clearly the principles and practices that can help groups cooperate and become more prosocial. Prosocial being behavior that's for the good of the whole, for the collective. So that's one kind of approach. Thinking about bridging algorithms and bridging systems, ways to kind of connect people across divides and kind of depolarize groups over time. And then there's that. And then in terms of people learning to connect with the land, we have a map. People can kind of again, like connect with their place and see what's around them and who's around them and what's happening. We've started adding map layers like native territories. You can see what traditional indigenous territory you live in. And then next we want to go into climate zone and, watersheds and different ways of modeling bioregions and kind of just help people really understand where they are and what's going on in the land around them. And that to me is like the first step in moving towards a kind of bioregional model of human coordination and governance and economy, where we're all really connected to the place and kind of thinking about how do we work together as humans in a shared home, in a shared place where what you do with the water influences me and my family. And so we have a real reason to be in relationship, to be coordinating common resources together. Mm. And so to us, that's like one of the most important structures to think about how governance should work or could work in a better way. Mm-hmm. And probably will need to work in the future as as climate change continues to impact our ability to live on the planet. We're going to need to be really tuned into the carrying capacity of the place that we live. Mm. So what is possible? How do we grow enough food for the people that live here and share water such that everybody has what they need? And think about housing and energy, and then of course into like healthcare and all the rest, education. But starting with the kind of basics of supporting the human and non-human life of the places that we live.
Got it. So effectively, I can go into Hylo and start to see, where am I, and learn more information from the mapping layers, and can create groups or join groups. And those groups may be virtual and distributed, or they might be local and place-based. And that then launches me into features and functionality that we're familiar with in terms of messaging and threaded asynchronous messaging and topics and voting and, ultimately resource sharing and allocation and so forth. And these are coordination tools, but importantly, this place-based theme, we have all the raw ingredients, right? I mean, we can actually create better contexts for organizing at local levels, which the social networks somewhat did with groups, but it seems like it didn't really take hold the way that we might have thought of in Web 2.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they succeeded in helping people connect digitally, virtually. I mean, Facebook groups are hugely popular, even still Google groups, but also Mighty Networks now and Slack and Discord. And then on the place-based side, Nextdoor is also a successful example of connecting people locally. I mean, there's obviously lots of problems with it.
Yeah.
But there isn't tools that are really connecting you with the specific land and place that you're in. No. And then we don't really have these community tools layered in with then governance and resource sharing. And of course, that's where Web3 is coming in and trying to figure this out. Mm-hmm. And I think bioregionalism, again, is a frame that feels really important to us in the long run. Mm. It's going to be hard to get there, right? It can't be a top-down, like, okay, now we're dividing the earth into these bioregions and now you're all making decisions together.
Right.
It's going to have to come through bottom-up movement building, community building, relationship building, working with the organizations, the nonprofits, the community centers, and the local governments that are already in a place. Mm. And so we're just starting to think about how to do this. Again, starting with the kind of education and just knowing and connecting with the place and the people. But at a certain point, when you start to bring in governance and resource sharing, there's so many questions that come up about how how are those decisions being made? Who's making them? Who are the stewards of these bioregional groups? We do already have some bioregional groups on Hylo that are experimenting with this.
Nice.
And of course, they're created by some set of individuals who decide we're going to create a bioregional group in this area, and then start to invite people into it. So that's an experiment. Mm. One of the most successful ones right now on the platform is called Salmon Nation, and they consider themselves a bioregional nation state oriented around the salmon run from California up to Alaska. So this big piece of the west coast of Turtle Island, and their focus is just on kind of connecting people, storytelling, and then supporting actually and giving resources to indigenous communities and other leaders that are, they call them edge walkers, people that are kind of making significant change within this bioregion. And of course, people that are working on water, clean water, and kind of supporting the salmon run is a piece of that, but it's kind of the whole health and well-being of this whole bioregion. So there's going to have to be a lot of experiments like that. Bioregions they're not, they're nested, they're messy, they overlap. It's not going to be something that we can kind of do this top-down approach on. But really thinking hard about like how to connect people and bring them together into a cohesive whole that can then start making decisions together, deciding how they would use common resources together, and building the kind of strength of a movement that can then change and influence the local governments that we have now.
Right. I love, we'll put a link to Salmon Nation in the show notes, and, definitely recommend people to check that one out. And I love how these tools and technologies are giving us new expressions of agency at local bottoms up levels, where we don't just sit and say, oh, well, local government didn't do it for me. I'm not in that council or that municipality, so therefore it's not my responsibility. But we can participate, and we must all chip in and row the canoe together. And so, in that spirit, I'm also curious, like, you are living and breathing human coordination, and a lot of us are still fumbling around and finding our way through these messy worlds of organizing with people in our local place, or organizing on teams, and having to learn how to organize when there's not as much in-person interaction across virtual distances. And any reflections about what you've learned about best practices for coordination, or things that particularly stand out to you as medicine for this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard and it's messy. And I think that, especially in the kind of Web3 and tech space, where people are often used to interacting through digital mediums, people shy away from conflict and shy away from dealing with, this is part of the problem with our kind of economic system in our world, where things are mediated through money, and we don't really have to be in relationship to get our needs met. As we start reorienting towards kind of mutual aid systems and local economies, circular economies, we're going to have to be in relationship. And so, I think that one of the biggest lessons is the sort of like a commitment to place and to people, and just a commitment to like working through those messy relational dynamics, conflict resolution, restorative justice, processes like this are necessary. And some of the like beautiful examples I've seen in my area, I live in Oakland, California now. There's a place called Canticle Farm there that has bought up a bunch of houses across a couple blocks and broken down the fences, and has a beautiful big garden and a bunch of homes. And one of the homes has actually been given to the local indigenous leaders and community there. One of the homes is all former felons that have, are kind of now working in the garden and participating in the community. And they have a restorative justice house where, like, when there's conflict, people go there and they sort their stuff out, and it's all kind of transparent, so people know that it's happening, and it's kind of happening in community. And they are based on actually Franciscan theology, and also the work of Joanna Macy, amazing elder and teacher, and kind of helping us all figure out how to work with the planet and each other and the web of life. So, I think, there's like, it's just putting down roots in a place and building community and working through the tricky stuff. And then I do think that the technology can help, right? It's like, we do need coordination tools. We're not going to go back from the level of the kind of digital economy and connection we have. And so, how can we just have ones that are not focused on selling us things and getting us to engage and stay on the platform, but are just oriented around building that trust, building that relationship, and getting us out into the world doing things together.
Well, I know you have a plane to catch, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you, Tibet, for sharing your voice and your message. People will go check out Hylo, and we'll include links to the projects you mentioned in the show notes. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really great to be here.
Thanks for tuning into our conversation with Tibet. I really appreciate his emphasis and lens around bioregionalism. You can learn more about Hylo and try out the tool at hylo.com. You can also check out some of the communities that Tibet mentioned, like Canticle Farm, Salmon Nation, and Open Team by following the links in the show notes below. For more conversations like these, check out maearth.com. We invite you to like, share, subscribe, give us feedback. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.